I'm Tina Dupuy, and you're watching the TYT Network. With me is Tim Mahalski, and we are talking Wisconsin. Specifically, what's going on with Wisconsin and the recalls, and they're going to have an election next week. And we have Scott Walker's brilliant op-ed that that was rejected by the New York Times. Wonder why? But Wisconsin still is ground zero for this fight for the unions and against the unions, and it's starting to be really heated. And we want to play this clip from Fox News. This is Megyn Kelly, and this really tells a lot about what's going on in Wisconsin from a Republican perspective.
To curb the power of state unions is now officially the law of the state, despite an ongoing court challenge. But the bigger story here may be the massive recall efforts funded with millions of dollars from unions and liberal groups across the country that are gaining ground at this moment. Lou Dobbs is the host of Lou Dobbs Tonight on the Fox Business Network, and he's with me now. Lou, the Republican State Leadership Committee, which is headed by Ed Gillespie, who was the former national GOP chairman, they are now so worried about this recall effort that they're making a mid-cycle investment of dough into Wisconsin that it could have used in 2012. But they are getting very concerned that this push by the left to have these GOP state senators recalled that it may be onto something.
Well, Ed Gillespie, as you know, is a smart guy. And if he says the Republicans need money to pour into Wisconsin, somebody better pay attention on the Republican side.
The left is pouring money into Wisconsin. This is, and
millions of dollars.
Millions
of dollars. That's the best part. She says like it's trillions.
Right. There is literally hundreds of dollars going in from all over the country. Right. So it's the billionaires against the left liberals, and so it looks like this is becoming a showdown. And we have on the line with us from Mother Jones Magazine, we have Andy Kroll, who has been covering the Wisconsin recall efforts and the protests.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for calling in. So what is the status currently in Wisconsin? What does it look like there? What are the people, how do they feel right now?
Well, as you sort of introed, they're fired up, and the battle there in Madison, while many thought it would sort of fade out after the initial rush of protests and a couple of weeks of massive turnout, that hasn't been the case. It's actually continued on now for well over a month. Now we're approaching 2 months, and there are multiple fronts here. Like you said, there's the recall battle of more than a dozen lawmakers in Wisconsin, and there's also this legal fight that is a soap opera in itself about whether the passage of Scott Walker's controversial bill was legal or not, and that's still unresolved, and we're not sure how that's going to come out.
Tim and I were actually snickering about this. We've been snickering about it all day, but Scott Walker wrote an op-ed to the New York Times, for the New York Times, and the New York Times rejected it. But instead of just kind of going away for being rejected, he's acted very much like Scott Walker and has decided to post it on his website. And I was wondering if you could give us your reaction to his op-ed piece that was not fit for the New York Times. He says that it's an op-ed that the New York Times doesn't want you to see. Right.
He cast it as if it was some subversive yet true, brilliant piece of writing that the New York Times wasn't bold enough to publish on its op-ed page. I was bemused that he just decided to go ahead and publish it on the website of the Wisconsin state government because it's bad in a lot of ways. I mean, the writing is as a journalist, the writing is pretty amateur, and the facts are just completely off the mark. Or if the facts, and when they're not wrong, just blatantly wrong, they're misleading or they're obfuscating. So it's not difficult to see why the New York Times op-ed page rejected this piece. And the Times' opinion editors had to have thought this was really bad because they often publish op-eds that balance out something they published before. We saw a Wisconsin professor pretty sharply criticized Walker. The professor was Bill Cronin. And usually at times would be happy to publish something that would sort of, push back against that or offer a different point of view. And the fact they rejected this just shows how crappy it is, to be honest, for lack of a better word.
That's a journalistic word.
Yeah.
In the article, though, in the op-ed, he talks about everything with the unions, but he doesn't mention anything about all the tax breaks that he gave to businesses. Why do you think he decided to leave that portion out?
Because it makes him look bad. It makes the entire premise of the reason why Wisconsin needs this quote unquote budget repair bill. It draws the entire thing into question because for one, Wisconsin it does have fiscal problems and does have debt problems, but they are nowhere near California's or Florida's or other states. He not only did he dramatize Wisconsin's problem to get this bill passed, but he also, threw into law a number of tax breaks, as you said, that made the problem worse. So he almost manufactured his own crisis so he could ram through a bill that guts unions, which so happened to be a major pillar of support for Democrats.
This is an actual quote, and from the New York Times op-ed or the New York Times doesn't want you to see, but sometimes bipartisanship is not so good. He's Shakespeare. So what does it look like next week they're having their first, they're having a special election for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, April 5th. And what have you heard about that on the ground? What does it look like?
Before the entire battle over this bill that's mobilized so many people, this Supreme Court race pitting a fairly liberal Democrat against a Scott Walker Republican, if you will, it was almost assured that David Prosser, the Republican, was going to win that, and it was going to win it in a landslide. And in the runoff primary that put these two candidates as the final two, suggested that. The protests have injected, an enormous amount of energy behind Joanne Kloppenburg, the Democratic candidate. Whether it's enough to push her over the top remains to be seen. I think, and I know a lot of other people think as well, that the Supreme Court race will be a litmus test for...
Like a bellwether.
Exactly, for whether the energy that we saw in Madison can be channeled into votes at the ballot box. And so people are going to be watching it very closely.
Andy Kroll, Mother Jones Magazine, thank you for calling in, and thank you for covering this issue for us.
Thank you.